Hey guys, it's Chris. From a naughty funeral home employee with a camera to a corpse that rose from its coffin like a zombie, here are 10 of the wildest times funerals went wrong. Number 10. Inappropriate pictures. Funerals are already depressing, and nobody wants to believe that some people really just have no respect for the dead. A couple from South Florida is having a bit of an issue with an employee at a funeral home after the employee took some inappropriate pictures of their dead daughter and then posted them on social media. I guess bit of an issue in this case is an understatement. You have to be seriously twisted to do something like this. And as you can imagine, taking pictures of the dead and posting them online is not part of the funeral home job description. The devastated parents of the deceased girl actually filed a lawsuit against the Stevens Brothers Funeral Home for the poor behavior, and rightfully so. According to the lawsuit, the parents of the girl hired the home to provide them with funeral services, but then someone who works there took a picture of the girl's cold, dead body and sent the picture to some of their friends, who ended up posting them online. Seriously, that is just beyond messed up. We don't know exactly how inappropriate these pictures were, as that information is not being released, thankfully. But it's safe to say that they must have been pretty bad, because the lawsuit is seeking damages in the form of $15,000. And according to what the owner of the funeral home told news outlets, the staff member, if proved to have done something malicious, will most definitely be fired. Number 9. Falling out of the coffin. A shocking moment was caught on camera somewhere in what appears to be Africa. During the funeral procession, the pallbearers were walking down the street holding a coffin containing a dead body on their shoulders. There were 4 people walking with the coffin when the bottom of it suddenly gave out and the corpse flopped onto the road. Even more shocking is the fact that the pallbearers didn't even realize the body had fallen out. How they didn't realize the load suddenly became a lot lighter is really anyone's guess. They kept on walking while the body, which was wrapped up in cloth like a mummy, lay limp on the concrete. It was such a shock to the people watching that you can hear screams and cries for help in the video. It's not clear what made the bottom of the coffin fall out, though it was probably just a faulty box. It didn't really look that sturdy. After quite a bit of yelling, the pallbearers ran back to where the body was laying in the street and proceeded to cover it up. Unfortunately, the video stopped at this point, so we don't know what happened afterwards. They either had to go and get a brand new coffin, or carry the body in the coffin like carrying a paper bag full of groceries that has a hole in the bottom. Number 8. Body mix-up. After a horrifying body mix-up in the Bronx, a family ended up mourning the wrong dead body at their funeral service. That's something you think could only happen at a twisted comedy movie, but it actually happened in real life. Valjean McDonald was 81 years old when sadly she passed away from cancer just several days before Christmas. The funeral service was held and the family arrived to say their goodbyes. Some family members even flew in all the way from Australia. But according to ABC7 Chicago, nobody noticed the mix-up because they were all too busy grieving. The excuse that came after was that everybody's eyes were full of tears, so they didn't notice that the woman in the casket was not Val McDonald. Sure, she was wearing the woman's clothes and jewelry, and yes, they did share a bit of a likeness, but they were definitely not the same person. It was actually the children who figured out it wasn't their grandmother in the coffin. It was a 10-year-old boy, one of Val's grandsons, who brought it to everyone's attention, telling them, "That doesn't look like my grandma." You're correct, and that's because it's not your grandma. Even after the boy figured it out, the adults were still in complete denial. After all, grieving the loss of a matriarch of a family only to realize it's the wrong woman is more than a little embarrassing. They said it didn't look like grandma because cancer had changed her appearance, but it turned out that the kids were right. The funeral home called the family 5 days later and told them that they'd made a mistake and accidentally put a different woman in her coffin. They ended up getting a free funeral out of the deal, and that particular business is now under investigation. Number 7. Drive-up funeral. In 2020, the coronavirus changed how a lot of daily businesses had to operate, including funeral homes. When Wanda DeSalle passed away from complications because of her contracting the coronavirus after catching the virus from attending a funeral earlier, everyone felt a lot safer if instead of attending the funeral physically, they did a bit of a drive-by. Weird, but hey, that's how the world has changed thanks to COVID-19. And so the 76-year-old nurse was transported in a hearse to her gravesite, and everyone who wanted to pay their respects drove by in their cars and did so out of their windows as if they were ordering a cheeseburger. All you could hear this day at the graveyard was the rumble of engines and the muffled cries coming from behind tinted glass. So how do you feel about a drive-through funeral service? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section down below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. Death at a funeral. The last place anyone expects a violent shooting to take place is at a funeral, yet a tragedy just like that recently did take place. A grieving mother in the state of Florida who was attending the funeral for her teenage son was shot and almost killed. As absurd as it sounds, this really did happen. According to USA Today, the dead teenager was only 18 years old when he was killed back in November by a Brevard County deputy in the city of Cocoa. Just as the pastor was finishing his prayers, a gunshot went off. It was a single shot, and no one knew where it came from. In the brief moment of silence that followed the shot, there was suddenly a scream from the victim's mother. She cried out, "I'm hit!" And most of the people in attendance panicked and screamed as they ran for their lives. But here's where things get really horrifying. The police investigation revealed that the shot was probably an accidental discharge. A 16-year-old boy who decided to bring a gun to the funeral service accidentally popped off the shot and almost killed his dead friend's mom. The bullet went through the kid's leg and hit her, though luckily she did survive. Still not the greatest thing to happen at your own son's funeral. We're sure this kid felt even more terrible than he already did after losing his pal, and he probably won't be bringing guns to any more funerals. But how did a young kid like that even get a gun, and why on earth did he bring it to a funeral in the first place? We have so many questions about this one. Number 5. Shocking disrespect. The biggest funeral firm in Britain has been accused of treating dead bodies with an appalling amount of disrespect. A recent investigation has revealed that the funeral firm was stacking up bodies like packages in a warehouse or old television sets in an industrial storage facility. Instead of keeping the dead bodies in a chapel before burial or cremation, the dead were stuck in a warehouse and piled up as if this was some sort of gross zombie film. But this atrocity is made even worse by the fact that grieving families thought their dead loved ones were being stored securely and respectfully in funeral homes. In one incident, the funeral home stuffed 4 bodies into the same van, and the lid had to be taken off an old woman's coffin so that they could all fit piled on top of one another. That's sad and disgusting. And here's where you'll get really angry. The company is called Co-op Funeral Care, and they made a whopping $52 million last year alone, according to the Daily Mail. And it's all thanks to the fact that they treat dead people like stock in an Amazon warehouse. People like this should probably be given the exact same respect they gave when it's their time to go, don't you think? And what do you think the consequences should be for a company like this? Number 4. Funeral crash. A funeral procession has led to a devastating highway traffic accident in Florida. The funeral procession had been heading down Highway 29 going north. A woman behind the procession driving a 2005 Chevrolet Impala was forced to stop in the middle of the highway to avoid crashing through the funeral cars because they were going so slowly. The guy coming up behind her didn't see her stop and rear-ended her so fast and so hard that her SUV flipped over. The guy who crashed into the Impala had to be sent to the hospital and was in serious condition, with wounds that could turn out to be fatal. The woman he hit only sustained minor injuries, though. In the end, this wasn't really a disaster at a funeral, it was more like a disaster caused by a funeral. The procession at the time was going up a hill. They were going no more than 30 miles an hour in a 70-mile-per-hour zone. And the lack of visibility caused total mayhem. Back roads are the way to go, especially with such precious cargo. Number 3. Funeral director arrested. This next one is pretty disturbing. Funeral director Joseph Bonner was arrested after he got busted abusing corpses at the Heritage Memorial Garden Cemetery in Pritchard. Luckily, he wasn't abusing the corpses in the way you might have thought. Instead, he got in trouble for not properly burying people. The police began investigating after multiple families filed complaints about a horrible odor coming from the graves at the cemetery. Not only that, but there were allegations thrown at the funeral director about him digging up bodies and using them for unknown purposes, and even digging up caskets and reusing them so he didn't have to buy new ones. He also broke rules by not actually embalming the bodies and sometimes not even burying them where they were supposed to be buried. In the end, the police had to excavate a series of graves to bring this guy up on charges. They were getting about 60 to 70 complaints a year about Joseph, which, let's be honest, is about 60 or 70 more than they should get about any funeral director. They found that the bodies had been poorly buried, with the caskets not sealed, and with some of them under only 8 inches of dirt instead of 2 feet. Number 2. Risen corpse. At a funeral in India, a man who had been declared legally dead by his doctors suddenly woke up just moments before his body was to be put in the ground. His family was attending the funeral ceremony when they witnessed his body begin to move. Everyone freaked out. The funeral was halted, and he was taken back to the hospital. Doctors then declared that he was still alive. Nobody knows what happened, but it looks like this guy rose from the dead. The doctors had put him on a ventilator support, and last we heard, he was still breathing. What's really scary is why he was declared dead in the first place. He was at a private hospital and his family ran out of money to pay for his treatment. And that's when the doctors declared him dead. But of course, they claim no wrongdoing on their part. Number 1. Animal Crossing Funeral. We already talked about one bizarre coronavirus funeral, but now we're gonna talk about another. A gamer who died of the coronavirus had himself the safest funeral imaginable. His death was celebrated on the Nintendo game Animal Crossing. Brandon Perez died at the age of 23, and his friends and family gave him a funeral service in the virtual world of Animal Crossing, apparently because he really loved that game. His family actually used his Nintendo to go into the virtual town that Brandon had built for himself. Then his friends and family watched while his avatar was laid out on a bed in the middle of some trees, and they all said their final respects. His cousin Priscilla Perez from Long Island said Brandon absolutely loved video games, so this type of service was perfect for him. It was the most beautiful thing that I've ever seen. We were able to go into the town that my cousin had built on Animal Crossing and leave flowers, Priscilla added. We have a really big family, and it made us happy to have that for Brandon. It's a place that we can go back to and be with him. It was a fitting end for a life lost way too early. Thanks for watching. What's the craziest thing you've ever seen at a funeral? Let us know in the comments section down below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. We'll see you next time.